Let's turn now to Chris Phillips. Chris Phillips is the former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. And of course, we're going to talk about the Axel Rudakubana case. And in particular, Chris, welcome.
Good morning, Russell.
Good morning. In particular, let's talk about the sentence, shall we, first, in terms of whether you believe, as a starting point, that it was adequate, or whether sentencing guidelines should be changed to allow a whole-of-life sentence for those under 18?
Well, yes, I do. We certainly think, or certain sections of our political society think that people are able to vote and make sensible decisions at 16. So when we're talking about people who are on the verge of being 18, surely they're just as responsible as an adult.
Yeah, and I think many people would agree with you. And I think the world's changed. I think, youngsters are growing up quicker. And certainly if a youngster can make rice in and have a crossbow and a zombie knife under their bed and go out and commit such atrocities, they should be dealt with as an adult. Adult crime, adult sentence, from my point of view. And I don't think many people listening to this seem to disagree with that, certainly from what I'm seeing from the calls coming in and the text messages. Let's talk about the terrorism element to this, or rather not, Chris, because of course the government and the CPS have made it very, very clear that in their opinion this was not terrorism. Lots and lots of people that I've seen on social media over the last day or so disagreeing with that. Now, I know there's a technical definition in terms of terrorism as a charge, as a label to an incident, has to meet certain tests in terms of it being the crime, the event being of an ideological nature. So generally something that seeks to change policy, government policy, something of a religious or a racial, an ideological nature. How do you feel about this not being deemed terrorism, given the terrorist elements to it, particularly the Ricin and the Al-Qaeda manual that were found in Axel Rudakubana's house?
I think, Russell, we should ask ourselves, would it make any difference? He wouldn't have got a stiffer sentence had it been terrorism. So really, there is no point in this being labelled as a terrorist attack. There are terrorist elements, as you quite rightly put, with regards to the Ricin, which, that alone is, really bizarre thing to do, unless you want to kill people, of course. And the terrorist manual, I think Al-Qaeda manual, these things do have a terrorist slant, but I think from a practical perspective, we need to look, would it have made any difference to the sentencing? No, he wouldn't have got any more. The simple fact is we have a definition of terrorism which sets it aside from other laws, effectively, in that you have to have, you're right, this violence, you have to have the violence or the threat of violence in order to do something specific, like change government, change the way we live, turn us all into extreme Islamic Muslims, etc. Would it have made any difference to the sentencing? No, I don't think it would.
And I was saying, Chris, that the CPS, who obviously decided not to pursue such an avenue, there was no evidence at all, despite the fact that it seems that he did convert to Islam and may well have been radicalised. I mean, there's some sketchiness around that, of course. Despite all of that, the CPS not able to unequivocally say that this was terrorism. Did you think some of this, and again, kind of going back to your days in counter-terrorism, do you think there was an issue there in terms of labelling it as such, and that then being a means by which, if that was disproved in court, that Axel Rudakubana might have got off the hook?
Well, it could have made a difference, and with legislation, you have to charge under the act that's most appropriate. And the CPS, I mean, I don't think there would have been an issue with charging with terrorism had he had some motive. I mean, this guy, his motive seems just to be to kill people.
Yeah.
And of course, in the United States, we have on almost a weekly basis a kid going into school and killing lots of other kids, and they aren't necessarily terrorism either. So it's a bit of conjecture, but I certainly think that if there was a real element of I'm doing this for a religious or for a political motive, then he would have been charged, I'm sure.
Yeah, but maybe, I guess, there are some, and you would have to argue on the right, that perhaps are seeking that terrorism link, I guess, maybe for their own kind of political satisfaction, if you know what I mean. From your point of view, though, you're saying it doesn't really matter. I guess it doesn't, because the crimes were the crimes. He was simply a psychopath. I wonder also, obviously, given his connections to Rwanda, and he was a second-generation immigrant, his parents from Rwanda. Rwanda, of course, very, very famous, infamous for all the wrong reasons, for a genocide, something that he seemed to have been obsessed with. I mean, there was material recovered from his house, his parents' house, relating to the detail of the Rwandan genocide, amongst other things. I mean, do you think there's a connection to be made there because of his heritage?
Well, there may well be. We don't exactly know who his father is, I don't think, and what his past is. But I say this, 52 years, that's as much as he would have ever got for any terrorism offence. I think it's obnoxious to think that he'll ever walk on the streets of the UK or anywhere ever again. I think the bigger point, Russell, if I could make it, is that we need to be braver with people who are showing these kind of signs, to lock them up before they actually commit the offence, rather than wait for them to do it, like it seems to have happened here. We seem to be scared of actually dealing with really bad people.
Yeah, and we touched on that earlier on, actually. In fact, we touched on that a number of times, that it seems that the authorities are scared, whether it's scared to make a decision, whether they are simply so left-wing and so woke that they believe that everybody can be changed and reformed and deserves a second, third, fourth, fifth chance, or in Axel Rudakubana's case, 11, 12 or 13 chances, given how many times he was found to be in possession of a knife and goodness knows what else. So, yeah, no, I think there is that. And I think also, as we touched on the show earlier on, I think there is an element of political correctness here. It may well be that the reason that he slipped through the net so many times was because of the hesitance by the authorities to label him as a threat given his ethnicity. And I think, look, we've seen that over the last few months with regard to the way that there is a difference in how different demographics have been dealt with in the aftermath of Southport, particularly when it comes to the riots. Certain demographics being allowed to behave as they want on the streets of Birmingham, for instance, as vigilantes. But when it comes to protesters, that are protesting Southport, and the lack of information and the fact that it may well be that there was an immigrant connection to the Southport murders, those individuals, of course, are dealt with in a very, very different way. So I do wonder if Keir's two-tier Keir approach to governance, and indeed that filtering down to the justice system and the police, is also at play here when it comes to why Axel Rudakubana was not prevented from doing this many years ago.
Well, it most definitely is a big issue. Political correctness has gone right through the system. People are scared, police officers as well, are scared to deal with the real problems, generally because they have these other issues of political correctness.
Because they're scared of being called racist and being scared to have a complaint levied against them and being taken off duty just because they've stopped and searched someone that happens to be black, and that black person says, "You're only stopping and searching me because I'm black." I mean, how do we stop that nonsense?
Well, we need to get a grip, really, as a nation, and understand that crime is. Well, we have such nonsense around political correctness, particularly in policing and the criminal justice system. We do need to deal with the issues that we face now. If you look at the gang-led culture within our cities, unfortunately, whichever way you want to play it, it's generally black on black.
Yeah.
That's the way it is in our cities. And I've policed city centres, and I know exactly the issues that we face. But for them, if you then prevent the police officers from doing the stop and search on the very people that you're most likely to be carrying it, because you say, well, you've got to stop an equal number of white people to black people, then you're just playing around with the system.
Well, it's worse than that, though, Chris, isn't it? Is the directive more along the lines of don't stop ethnic minorities because they will shout racism? Because, like with the grooming rape gang scandal, the police, councils, the authorities are worried about being not just labelled racist, but being seen to be the catalyst for, big inverted commas here again, inciting tension in communities. This nonsense has to stop. We surely need to get back to the principle of policing and justice, which is simply to do it on a balanced and even-handed, equitable way.
Without fear or favour is the term that
Yes.
Robert Peel used, and that's exactly what we need to do.
But we're not doing that, Chris, are we?
But can I say that this really, it didn't start with the Stephen Lawrence issue and the ongoing, naming of police as being institutionally racist. It didn't start there, but that has had a big effect on policing, and it's had a big effect on society, I think. And I think, if you were, just ask yourself, if you were a police officer and you knew it was going to bring all types of grief on you, if you conducted what you think is a very appropriate stop and search and didn't find something, and then were labelled as a racist because of it, you just would shy away from it. And police officers do have the ability to either go to the areas where all the problems are, or to go to another area where it's nice and safe and don't have to get involved in these things. And if we want our police officers to help to solve the problems of our city centres, then we need to support them and back them up. And they are going to make mistakes. There's no doubt about that.
But we need senior police officers, those that seem to be drafted in, that are increasingly woke, those that are drafted in that have had an academic career, probably never walked the beat in their lives. We need them to be replaced by, good old-fashioned coppers that understand common sense. And for them, it's the senior police officers that need to support the rank and file, rather than looking to trip them up with some ridiculously overt DEI agenda.
Well, one of the biggest issues, I think, is the politicisation of the police. And, these police crime commissioners, when that was brought in, it brought the police into effectively being managed and overseen by a specific politician.
When
they were brought in, they weren't supposed to be party political, but actually that's what's happened. They're either Conservative, they're Labour, or they're Liberal.
Chris, would you agree with me that the introduction of police and crime commissioners, and I know some of them, was an absolute waste of time and money? They don't do anything. They don't hold anybody to account. They are not held to account. Last time I looked, in Essex, where Roger Hurst is the police and crime commissioner, who I think has certain questions to answer, particularly when it comes to Alison Pearson and his forced doorstepping journalists. I mean, he had something like a 17% turnout in his election. So 83% of the electorate ignored the fact that he was up for election. I mean, they are completely inconsequential, aren't they, police and crime commissioners?
Inconsequential, but in as much as they don't
Let's get rid of them. Let's get rid of them.
Yeah, absolutely. They should never have been brought in the first place. It was a disastrous decision. One of many, actually, made by David Cameron and the Home Office at the time. It's a complete nonsense. Return policing to as it was. OK, it's never going to be perfect. But I can tell you now, 20 years ago, the police in this country was seen as being in the top echelons of police across the world. It's not anymore.
No, I bet it's not now. Can we just turn to the subject of parents? Are you a parent, Chris?
I am, yeah.
How many kids you got?
And a grandparent.
Are you? OK, so your kids are grown up. Can you imagine a situation where one of your children has a crossbow, a zombie knife and a Tupperware tub full of rice in under their bed and you wouldn't know about it?
No, I mean, it's quite incredible, the lack of parenting. I mean, this is a much bigger thing, I think, but actually we have come to the stage now where kids seem to rule the household in many families across the world.
They do, and maybe parents are scared of them, particularly if they know that they're carrying knives around. But not
only scared of them, but actually have given the power over to their kids.
And the same with social services, perhaps, turning a blind eye because of wokeness. The same with schools that are scared to do anything because every kid now knows that they can just scream abuse or, they did this, they did that. And then, the parents, of course, always back up the child in school. So schools have just put their hands up and said, look, there's no point trying to discipline kids anymore because we're on a hiding to nothing. But let's think about Axel Rudakubana's parents, who, of course, have now moved. They're in hiding, apparently. What consequences do you think they should bear? What accountability for the fact that, A, they brought this monster up, and a question mark there in terms of, and again, I'm no psychologist, but how much responsibility they bear there in terms of how he turned out. But specifically to the question of, they knew exactly what he was up to. There are stories that a week before the actual Southport atrocity, Axel Rudakubana had to be pulled out of a taxi by his father because he knew that he was on his way to commit an offence at his former school. Weapons, ricin, Al-Qaeda manuals in his bedroom. Either the parents should have known. If they didn't, they're certainly very, very negligent. But if parents have an idea that their child is an absolute wrong-un, that is going to hurt other members of society. And by the way, the other thing that Axel Rudakubana apparently did was to call the child line number and say to the person that answered the phone, can you please help me? I'm going to kill someone. That came out in evidence yesterday. Parents, his parents, must have been aware of him and his behaviour. How much accountability should they now hold, maybe criminally, for allowing him to carry on and commit those murders and attempted murders in Southport?
Well, there's always a lot that happens behind the scenes, and it's difficult to comment specifically on him because I don't know the full facts of him. It's horrendous. I mean, his actions and his actions up until that day actually have been horrendous. I don't know whether or not the parents have been trying to discipline him and found it impossible. I don't know whether he's been reporting that the parents have been reporting him to social services and had no assistance from them. I don't know. But what I do know is that the general part of this should be that parents are responsible for the actions of their children. And, I've seen some great examples of that in policing over the years where parents really deal with their kids. And I've also seen parents that are completely overwhelmed by their children and have no form of control over them whatsoever.
So, Chris, I mean, look, you're right. Morally, of course, they have responsibility, but I'm talking about criminal responsibility. I'm not even sure that the legislation exists. And my question to you, I guess, is, should it exist? Should parents be held criminally culpable for the behaviour of people like Axel Rudakubana? Because actually, if we want to play the card as had to be played by way of the sentencing guidelines, that he was sentenced as a child, well, the last time I looked, anyone under 18 that is still a child is the responsibility of their parents, so that his parents should surely bear some responsibility criminally here, shouldn't they?
Well, criminally wise, if you know someone's going to commit a criminal offence and you don't do anything about it, you do have some criminal responsibility. So that is feasible. We don't know the full story yet, and it's difficult to comment without knowing. But Chris,
I don't want to put you on the spot. The parents undoubtedly knew of his intentions and his state of mind. They undoubtedly knew. So why is nobody else, I've not seen this in the media at all apart from on this station, why are the parents not being called out and made culpable? A, so that they have a case to answer, but also as a message to other parents that might have errant, psychopathic, evil children that might do the same as Axel Rudakubana, as a message to those parents that you've got to shop your son or daughter if they have murderous intent.
Yeah, and it's exactly the same for terrorism offences. If you've got your son looking at or daughter looking at terrorism material and becoming radicalised, it must be in your it must be your job legally to tell the police and let the police deal with it, or let social services deal with it. But let's go on to the next stage, because we don't know exactly how effective, clearly in this case not, the social services were and the police were.
Well, hopeless.
And actually knowing what
they were hopeless.
He was up to.
They were hopeless, all of them. Prevent, I think, actually are off the hook to an extent, because they would say, look, it isn't terrorism. Our terms of reference are terrorism, potential terrorism. But
believe me, they've got enough. They've got enough on their plate.
But social services, schools, parents, police, something should have been done here, not least to have Axel Rudakubana sectioned under the Mental Health Act. That should have happened. Chris, got to leave it there. Look, thank you very much indeed for that. Great conversation, great debate.